Hello, my dear friends. I'm sitting here in my kitchen this morning, watching the Spanish moss sway in Savannah breeze, and I have a story that needs telling. It's about trust, about family, and about what happens when someone mistakes your kindness for weakness. You know how they say elderly wisdom comes with age? Well, sometimes that wisdom is hard-earned through heartbreak. I should have known something was wrong when she started calling me Meemaw after just 2 weeks. My own grandchildren took months to warm up to that name, but Crystal Beaumont rolled it off her tongue like honey from the very first Sunday dinner. It was Valentine's Day 2023 when my son Marcus first brought her home. I'd been living alone in our family's Victorian mansion for 8 years since my Robert passed, and I'll admit I was lonely. The house felt too big sometimes, all 5,200 square feet of it echoing with memories. When Marcus called that morning, his voice bright with excitement, saying he wanted me to meet someone special, my heart just lifted. She walked into my foyer wearing a pink dress that matched her manicured nails, and the first words out her mouth were, "Oh my stars, this is like Tara from Gone with the Wind." She stood there, neck craned back, taking the 12-foot ceilings and the crystal chandelier Robert's great-grandfather had shipped from Austria. Her eyes weren't on Marcus when she said it. They were calculating the crown molding, the hardwood floors, the antique furniture. But I told myself I was being unfair. Maybe I'd grown too suspicious in my old age. After all, our home was impressive. Robert had restored every inch of it himself, and it sat on 3.2 acres in Savannah's historic district. Anyone would be amazed. During dinner, Crystal asked question after question about the family history. How long had the Harrisons owned the property? Were there any historical preservation requirements? Had we ever considered the house's value for estate planning purposes? She made it sound so innocent, so interested in becoming part of our legacy. "I just want to understand everything about this beautiful family I'm joining," she said, reaching over to squeeze Marcus's hand. He beamed at her with such pride, my heart ached. My boy deserved happiness. He'd been through a rough divorce, was working hard to support his teenagers, living paycheck to paycheck despite his decent insurance job. Looking back now, I realized at first it was when Crystal started her research. While Marcus and I caught up, she excused herself to use the powder room. Twice. I thought nothing of it then, but I know now she was photographing the family portraits, memorizing the layout, making mental notes of everything valuable. As the weeks went by, Crystal became a regular fixture. She'd show up on Saturdays with store-bought peach cobbler in her own dish, claiming she'd made it from her grandmother's recipe. She volunteered to help with my grocery shopping, insisted on carrying the heavy bags, and always seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being. "Me, Ma, you shouldn't be climbing ladders to change light bulbs," she'd say, taking the bulb from my hands. "What if you fell? Marcus would never forgive himself if something happened to you." I appreciated the help. Truly I did. But there was something about the way she said it, like she was already imagining me as frail, incapable. At 72, I was still sharp as a tack. I did the crossword puzzle and pen every morning, managed my rental properties, balanced my checkbook to the penny. But Crystal seemed to see me differently, like I was already 1 foot in the grave. The engagement came in April, during Easter brunch in my garden. Marcus had asked to use a gazebo where Robert proposed to me 47 years earlier. I thought it was sweet, honoring our family tradition. I watched from the kitchen window as he got down on one knee among the azaleas, and Crystal's reaction, well, that's when I knew for certain. She didn't look at the ring. She didn't look at Marcus. Her eyes went straight to the house, scanning from the wraparound porch to the third-story dormer windows. She was already calculating, already planning. When she finally looked at Marcus, her smile was perfect. Practice, I'd say now. They came inside afterward, both glowing, and Crystal threw her arms around me. "I can't wait to be part of this beautiful family legacy, Meemaw," she whispered in my ear. The word legacy sent a chill down my spine, but I smiled and welcomed her to the family, because that's what you do. That's what grandmothers do. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan Robert installed in 1987, I couldn't shake the feeling that Crystal wasn't marrying my son. She was marrying my house. And that's when these elderly wisdom stories started taking a dark turn, though I didn't know just how dark yet. Spring melted into summer, and Crystal's visits became more frequent, more intimate. She had a key made for emergencies, she said, and started showing up unannounced with little gifts and helpful suggestions. I tried to appreciate her thoughtfulness, but something about her presence made me feel like a guest in my own home. "Me, Ma, you left the stove on again," she'd announce, loud enough for Marcus to hear when he stopped by after work. I protested I'd only stepped away for a moment to answer phone, but she'd already turned it off and was shaking her head with that concerned smile. These little incidents started happening more often. My reading glasses would disappear from their usual spot on the kitchen counter, only to turn up in the refrigerator or the linen closet. "Oh, honey, you must have set them down somewhere and forgotten," Crystal would say sweetly, handing them back to me. But I knew exactly where I'd left them. I'd been using the same routine for 8 years. The worst part was watching Marcus's face during these moments. My strong, capable son, the boy who used to climb trees fearlessly and fix broken toys with determination, would get this worried crease between his eyebrows. He'd study me like he was looking for signs of something I couldn't see. "Mom, are you feeling okay lately?" he asked one evening after Crystal had found my car keys in the flour canister. "Maybe you should see Dr. Patterson for a checkup." That's when I realized what was happening. Crystal wasn't just moving my things. She was building a case. Every forgetful moment was evidence in her file, proof that Dorothy Harrison was losing her marbles. And my son, bless his trusting heart, was believing every word of it. In May, Crystal lost her apartment lease unexpectedly. Of course she did. Marcus asked if she could stay in the guest wing, just temporarily, while they looked for a place together. How could I say no? My boy was happy, engaged, planning a future. I wasn't about to become the interfering mother-in-law who ruined his second chance at love. Crystal moved in with 2 suitcases and a bright smile. Within a week, she'd rearranged the guest bathroom, reorganized the kitchen spice rack, and started helping me sort through my mail. "You shouldn't worry about these boring bills, Meemaw," she'd say, taking the electric bill from my hands. "Why don't you let Marcus and me handle this stuff? You've done enough for us. Now it's our turn to take care of you." She made it sound like such a gift, such a loving gesture. But I'd been managing my own finances since I was 18 years old. I'd balanced the family books through Robert's illness, handled the insurance claims, managed the rental properties that supplemented my pension and Social Security. My monthly income was $4,200, not wealthy, but comfortable and carefully managed. But Crystal had a way of making my competence seem like stubbornness, my independence like pride that could hurt the people who loved me. She'd sigh and exchange glances with Marcus when I insisted on reviewing my own statements, like they were dealing with a difficult child. The real turning point came when I caught her in Robert's study. Our bedroom was right above his old office, and I'd always been a light sleeper. Around midnight, I heard someone moving around downstairs. I assumed it was Marcus getting a late-night snack, but when I peered over the banister, I saw Crystal in the study with a flashlight, going through Robert's old desk. I watched her open drawer after drawer, photographing documents with her phone. She found my will in the bottom drawer, the one I'd updated after Robert's death, leaving everything to Marcus with provisions for the grandchildren. She held up to her phone's light and took several pictures before carefully replacing it exactly where she'd found it. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about love or family or even money in the normal sense. This was reconnaissance. Crystal was studying my assets like a military strategist, and I was her target. I crept back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding. 40 years of marriage had taught me to trust my instincts, and every instinct was screaming that this woman was dangerous. But how do you tell your son that his fiancée is planning something terrible when you can't prove it yet? That night, I started my own documentation. I pulled out the journal I kept faithfully for over 40 years. Robert used to tease me about my daily novels, and began recording every interaction with Crystal, every moved item, every concerned comment, every time she answered for me or spoke about my condition to others. Because if Crystal thought she could play the long game, she was about to learn that elderly wisdom includes patience, observation, and the kind of record-keeping that comes from decades of managing a household and raising a family. She might have youth and manipulation on her side, but I had something more valuable: the truth, carefully documented and waiting for the right moment to surface. And as I wrote that first entry about finding her in Robert's study, I realized this wasn't just about protecting my property anymore. This was about protecting my son from a woman who saw our family as nothing more than a business opportunity. The healing would have to come later. First, I had to prevent the damage. By July, Crystal had perfected her routine. She arrived each morning with coffee and pastries from a bakery downtown, settling into my kitchen like she belonged there. Her observations had become more pointed, her concerns more public. "Marcus, I'm worried about your mother," she'd say during their phone calls, making sure I could hear from the next room. Yesterday, she put salt in her coffee instead of sugar, and this morning she tried to water the silk plant in the living room. Maybe we should get her checked out. The salt in the coffee was a lie. I'd been drinking my coffee black for 30 years. But Marcus wasn't there to see what really happened. He was at work, trusting the woman he loved to care for the mother who'd raised him. Dr. Patterson had been our family physician for 15 years. He'd guided Robert through his cancer treatments, helped me through the grief afterward, and always treated me with respect and genuine care. So when Crystal suggested a wellness check, just to ease everyone's minds, I agreed. After all, I had nothing to hide. Crystal drove me to the appointment in her little red car, chattering nervously the whole way. "Now, Meemaw, don't be embarrassed if Dr. Patterson asks about your memory. We're all here to help you, and there's no shame in admitting when things get a little fuzzy." I should have known then what was coming. Dr. Patterson's waiting room was full of elderly patients, and I noticed how Crystal positioned herself strategically. When the nurse called my name, Crystal jumped up immediately. "I'm her daughter-in-law," she announced. "She gets confused sometimes, so I need to come in with her to make sure she doesn't forget anything important." In the examination room, something felt different. Dr. Patterson, usually warm and talkative, seemed cautious. He had a folder on his desk that he kept glancing at, thicker than my usual file. "Mrs. Harrison," he began gently, "your family has expressed some concerns about your cognitive function. Can you tell me how you've been feeling lately?" Before I could answer, Crystal leaned forward. "Doctor, she's been having some troubling episodes. Forgetting to turn off appliances, losing things, getting confused about dates and times. We're just worried about her safety." I tried to correct her, to explain that I've been fine, but every time I spoke, Crystal would add her own interpretation. "She doesn't always remember these incidents," she'd say with such convincing concern. "That's part of what worries us." Dr. Patterson began a series of cognitive tests. Simple questions about the date, the president, basic math problems. I answered everything correctly, but I could see Crystal's disappointment in my peripheral vision. She'd been hoping I'd fail, counting on it even. But then came the questions about daily living. Do you ever feel confused about routine tasks? Forget to take medications? Have trouble managing finances? She gets overwhelmed easily. Crystal interjected before I could respond. Marcus has been helping with her bills because she was making errors. And just last week, she couldn't remember how to use the washing machine. It was lie after lie, delivered with such sincerity that even I began to doubt myself for a moment. Had I really put detergent in the fabric softener compartment? Had I really forgotten how to program the coffee maker? Crystal's version of events sounded so reasonable, so concerned, so loving. Dr. Patterson prescribed some routine blood tests to rule out vitamin deficiencies or other medical causes for cognitive changes. But I could see in his eyes that he was already forming an opinion. A 72-year-old widow living alone in a big house, with a caring family member reporting concerning behaviors. It fit a pattern he'd seen before. In the car afterward, Crystal was triumphant in that subtle way of hers. "I'm so glad we did this, Meemaw. Dr. Patterson really cares about you, and now we have a baseline for monitoring any changes." But I knew what had really happened. Crystal had spent weeks preparing for this appointment, building a narrative of decline that would justify whatever came next. She'd turned my doctor into an unwitting ally in her campaign to prove I was incompetent. That evening, Marcus called to check on how the appointment went. Crystal answered his questions with the same concerned sweetness she'd shown Dr. Patterson. "The doctor wants to keep an eye on things," she reported. "He's concerned about some cognitive changes, but we caught it early. The important thing is that she's not living alone anymore. I can watch for any warning signs." Listen to that language. Cognitive changes, warning signs. Not living alone anymore. She was already talking about me like I was a diagnosis instead of a person, preparing Marcus to see his mother as a problem to be managed rather than a woman to be respected. But Crystal had made one crucial mistake in her performance at the doctor's office. She'd been so focused on painting me as confused and forgetful that she revealed how closely she'd been watching me, how detailed her observations were. No casual visitor would notice such small daily habits unless they were specifically looking for problems. That night, I added Dr. Patterson's appointment to my journal, recording every lie Crystal had told, every exaggeration, every moment she'd spoken for me instead of letting me speak for myself. These elderly wisdom stories had taught me that truth is patient. It waits for the right moment to emerge. And I was learning that sometimes the best defense against manipulation is simply to document it, carefully and completely, until the pattern becomes undeniable. Because I had a feeling this was just the beginning of Crystal's medical strategy, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. August brought the first real escalation. Crystal had been laying groundwork for months, but now she was ready to make her move. It started with a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I was in the garden, tending to my late-blooming roses, when Crystal and Marcus sat on the back porch discussing my situation. The kitchen window was open, and their voices carried clearly across the humid Savannah air. "She's getting worse, honey," Crystal was saying in that soft, concerned tone she perfected. "Yesterday she tried to pay the water bill twice, and this morning she couldn't remember her own phone number when the pharmacy called." More lies, but Marcus didn't know that. I heard the concern in his voice when he replied, "Maybe we should talk to Dr. Patterson again, or look into getting some help for her." "I've been thinking about that too," Crystal said, and I could practically hear her smile. "The problem is, what if something happens to her? What if she falls, or gets confused and wanders off, or makes a financial mistake that puts her in danger? We need to be able to step in quickly." That's when she brought up the power of attorney. She'd done her research, knew exactly how to frame it as protection rather than control. "It wouldn't change anything day to day," she explained to my trusting son. "She'd still manage everything herself. But if there's an emergency or if she gets to the point where she can't make decisions safely, we'd be able to help without having to go through courts and lawyers." I set down my pruning shears and moved closer to the window. This was the moment I'd been dreading. The moment Crystal would try to get legal control over my life. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I don't know, Crystal. Mom's always been so independent. She managed everything when Dad was sick, handled all the insurance and medical stuff. It feels wrong to take that away from her." Bless his heart, my boy was trying to protect me even as his fiancée manipulated him. "Of course she was capable then," Crystal replied smoothly. "But that was 8 years ago, honey. People change as they age. The kindest thing we can do is take this burden off her shoulders before it becomes overwhelming." Burden. She called my independence a burden. That evening, they approached me together. Marcus looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his wedding ring from his first marriage, a habit he'd had since childhood when he was nervous. Crystal, on the other hand, radiated confidence. "Mom," Marcus began hesitantly, "we've been talking, and we think it might be good to set up a power of attorney arrangement. Just for emergencies, you understand. So if anything ever happened, Crystal and I could help with bills and things." I looked at my son, really looked at him. 45 years old. Still that earnest boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. He genuinely believed he was protecting me. But Crystal was watching my reaction like a hawk, waiting for me to agree or calculating her next move if I refused. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but I'm managing just fine on my own." Crystal leaned forward, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Of course you are, Meemaw. You're doing wonderfully. This is just insurance, like wearing a seatbelt. You don't expect to need it, but you're glad it's there. But I'd seen what happened to my friend Helen Morrison when her daughter-in-law got power of attorney. Suddenly, Helen couldn't access her own bank account without permission. Her spending was monitored, questioned, controlled. The woman who'd raised 4 children and run a successful dress shop for 30 years became a child again, asking permission to buy groceries. "I need to think about it," I said. Crystal's smile never wavered, but I caught a flash of irritation in her eyes. "Of course, take all the time you need. There's no rush. We just want to make sure you're protected." But there was a rush, and we all knew it. Every day I remained legally independent was another day Crystal couldn't access my accounts, couldn't make decisions about my property, couldn't move forward with whatever plan she was hatching. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. Marcus would call with hypothetical questions. "Mom, what would happen if you were in an accident and couldn't pay your bills? What if you needed medical care and couldn't communicate your wishes?" Meanwhile, Crystal started monitoring my mail more closely. She'd bring it in from the box before I could get to it, sorting through it with the efficiency of a secretary. "Just organizing things for you, Meemaw," she'd say when I asked why she was opening my bank statements. But I noticed she was particularly interested in my financial documents. She'd study my retirement account statements, take pictures of insurance policies with her phone, make notes about my rental property income. She was building a portfolio of my assets, and I was becoming increasingly certain she had specific plans for them. The breaking point came when she suggested I should simplify my banking. "All these different accounts must be so confusing, Meemaw. What if we consolidated everything into one account that Marcus and I could help you manage?" That's when I realized Crystal's timeline was accelerating. She wasn't just planning for some distant future when I might be incapacitated. She was trying to gain control now, while I was still completely competent, by convincing everyone around me that I wasn't. The elderly wisdom I'd gained from 40 years of marriage and motherhood told me this was a battle I couldn't win through direct confrontation. Crystal was too skilled at manipulation, too good at playing the concerned daughter-in-law. If I fought her openly, I'd look paranoid and difficult. Exactly the image she was trying to create. But I had advantages she didn't know about. Patience, for one. I'd learned it through years of raising a strong-willed child and caring for a dying husband. Documentation, for another. Those daily journal entries were becoming a detailed record of her deception and connections in the community that ran deeper than her surface charm. It was time to start building my own case, quietly and carefully, because if Crystal wanted to play the long game, she was about to discover that elderly wisdom includes knowing when to be strategic, when to wait, and when to let your opponent reveal their true intentions before you make your move. Family forgiveness would come later, after I protected my family from someone who saw love as a weakness to exploit. September arrived with its first hint of autumn, and Crystal's strategy shifted into something more sinister. She'd failed to get power of attorney through persuasion, so now she was moving to isolate me from the people who might question her narrative of my declining mental state. It started with my book club. I'd been meeting with the same group of women every Thursday for 12 years. We worked our way through everything from historical fiction to philosophy, and these ladies had sharp minds and sharper instincts. If anyone would see through Crystal's manipulation, it would be them. "Meemaw, you seem so tired after those book club meetings," Crystal mentioned one Tuesday morning, arranging fresh flowers in a vase on my kitchen table. "All that discussion and debate. Maybe it's too stimulating for someone your age?" I looked up from my crossword puzzle, completed in pen as always, and studied her face. She was wearing that concerned expression again, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "I enjoy the mental stimulation," I said calmly. "Those women keep me sharp." "I'm sure they do, honey, but Dr. Patterson mentioned that overstimulation can sometimes accelerate cognitive decline in seniors. Maybe you should take a little break, just temporarily, while we figure out the best way to manage your health." There was again that word manage, like I was a problem to be solved instead of a person to be respected. But worse than that, she was using Dr. Patterson's authority to support her argument, twisting his general advice about stress management into something that served her purposes. I called Helen Montgomery that afternoon, Judge Montgomery, as I still thought of her, even though she retired from family court the previous year. Helen was the sharpest legal mind in our book club, and if anyone would understand what was happening, it would be her. "Dorothy," Helen said after I'd explained the situation, "this sounds like a textbook case of elder isolation. It's often the first step in financial exploitation cases. The perpetrator systematically cuts the victim off from their support network, making them more dependent and less likely to seek help." But when I tried to call Helen back the next day, Crystal answered my phone. She'd been helping by answering calls while I was in the shower, she explained. "Oh, that was Judge Montgomery?" She seemed confused when I told her you weren't feeling up to talking. "I hope she's okay. She mentioned something about you missing book club again." I hadn't missed book club. Crystal had canceled my attendance while I was getting dressed, telling the hostess that I was having one of my difficult days and wouldn't be joining them. By October, Crystal had managed to discourage or intercept contact with most of my social connections. She'd told my hairdresser I was too anxious for appointments right now. She'd informed my neighbor Mrs. Chun that I was resting and shouldn't be disturbed. She'd even called my church and suggested that I was overwhelmed by social obligations. Each conversation was framed as care and protection, but the result was the same. I was becoming a prisoner in my own home, surrounded by the things I loved, but cut off from the people who might help me fight back. The worst part was watching Marcus accept all of this as evidence of my deterioration. When Helen Montgomery finally managed to reach him directly, expressing concern that she hadn't seen me in weeks, Marcus thanked her for her worry, but assured her that Crystal was taking excellent care of me. "She's been having some challenging days," he explained, unknowingly parroting Crystal's language. "Crystal thinks it's better if she doesn't get overwhelmed with too many social commitments right now." But Crystal's most devastating move came when she started targeting my independence in more concrete ways. She convinced Marcus that I shouldn't be driving alone anymore. What if she gets confused and can't find her way home? She suggested that someone should be with me when repair services came to house. She might agree to unnecessary work if she's not thinking clearly. Most cruelly, she began intercepting my mail and phone calls more systematically. When my rental property manager called with routine questions about lease renewals, Crystal told him I was not available to discuss business matters and suggested he contact Marcus instead. When my financial advisor tried to schedule our annual review, she explained that I was having some cognitive difficulties and wasn't able to make financial decisions independently. I was being erased from my own life, one connection at a time. But Crystal made one critical error during this phase. She underestimated the depth of the relationships I'd built over 72 years in the same community. Some connections can't be severed with a few phone calls and concerned explanations. Mrs. Chin didn't stop watching for me at the mailbox just because Crystal said I needed rest. Helen Montgomery didn't stop caring just because Crystal claimed I was overwhelmed. And my pastor, Reverend Williams, didn't stop checking on parishioners just because a relative said they were managing fine. These elderly wisdom stories taught me that real community connections run deeper than surface manipulation. When you've lived in the same place, attended the same church, shopped at the same stores for decades, people notice when you disappear. They care enough to ask questions, to push back against convenient explanations. And while Crystal was busy cutting me off from the outside world, I was still keeping my journal, still documenting every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to control my narrative. She might have isolated me from my normal sources of support, but she couldn't isolate me from the truth. The healing and emotional growth would come later, after I found a way to reconnect with the people who truly cared about me and expose Crystal's systematic campaign to erase Dorothy Harrison from her own life. But first, I needed to figure out how to break through the walls she built around me, and I had a feeling that would require some creative thinking, and perhaps a few allies Crystal didn't know I had. By November, Crystal had grown bolder, with me effectively isolated from my support network and Marcus convinced of my declining condition. She began the next phase of her plan, presenting the solution to the problem she created. It started with brochures. Glossy pamphlets for premier memory care communities began appearing on my kitchen counter, mixed in with the mail Crystal now sorted for me daily. Sunset Manor, Golden Years Haven, Tranquil Oaks Memory Care, each one promising specialized care for seniors with cognitive difficulties, beautiful facilities, and peace of mind for families. I was just researching options, Crystal explained when I asked about them. Not that we need them now, of course, but it's good to be prepared. Some of these places have waiting lists years long. But I noticed she'd been more than researching. Several brochures had appointment cards stapled to them, tour dates circled in red pen, notes about pricing and availability scrawled in her handwriting. The numbers were staggering. These facilities cost between $8,000 and $12,000 per month, far more than my $4,200 monthly income could cover. But Crystal had already done that math too, I realized. My house was worth approximately $850,000, and my savings and investments totaled another $300,000. Sell everything, and there would be enough to cover memory care costs for years, with plenty left over. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Crystal didn't just want my money. She wanted me warehoused somewhere she could control, while she and Marcus lived in my house, and managed what remained of my assets. Thanksgiving provided the perfect opportunity. For her next move, Marcus's children were coming for dinner. Sarah, 17, and Michael, 15, along with his ex-wife Jennifer, who'd always been cordial despite their divorce. Crystal volunteered to host the dinner at my house. Of course. After all, she was practically family now, and it would be so much easier than having me worry about cooking for everyone. I should have known she was setting a stage. The dinner itself was beautiful. Crystal had outdone herself with decorations, an elaborate menu, and impeccable presentation. She played the perfect hostess, charming the teenagers with questions about school, complimenting Jennifer's new haircut, making sure everyone's wine glass stayed full. But throughout the evening, she managed my behavior like a director managing a difficult actor. When I tried to tell my grandson Michael about his grandfather Robert's woodworking projects, Crystal gently interrupted. Now, Meemaw, you told him that story just a few minutes ago. Michael, why don't you tell us about your basketball season instead? I hadn't told the story before, but Michael, polite teenager that he was, switched topics without question. The message was clear to everyone at the table. Grandmother was repeating herself, losing track of conversations. When Jennifer complimented the cranberry sauce, and I mentioned it was my late mother's recipe, Crystal smiled indulgently and said, "Oh, honey, that's so sweet that you remember her recipe. Of course, this cranberry sauce is from the deli downtown, but your mother's recipe sounds lovely." The implication hung in the air. I was confusing reality with memory, unable to distinguish between what was happening now and what had happened in the past. The final blow came when I corrected a historical detail during dinner conversation. Marcus had mentioned something about the Battle of Gettysburg, getting the date wrong by several years. I'd always been good with history. Robert and I had visited Civil War battlefields throughout our marriage, and I'd read extensively about the period. Actually, honey, I said gently, that battle was in July 1863, not 1867. The table fell silent for a moment, and then Crystal's voice filled the space with synthetic concern. "Oh, Meemaw, that's not right. Your memory has been playing tricks lately, hasn't it? The Civil War ended in 1865, so there couldn't have been a battle in 1867. But I hadn't said 1867. Marcus had. I'd corrected him to 1863, which was absolutely accurate. Yet somehow, in Crystal's retelling, I'd become confused one, making impossible claims about post-war battles. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. Jennifer looked concerned. And Marcus looked at me with such pity, such gentle sadness, that my heart nearly broke. My son was looking at his mother, like she was already lost to him. After dinner, while I helped clear the table, I overheard Crystal talking quietly with Jennifer in the hallway. "She's been having more episodes like this lately," Crystal was saying. "Marcus and I are starting to look into care options. We want to make sure she's safe and gets the help she needs." Jennifer's response was everything Crystal had hoped for. "Oh my goodness, I had no idea it had gotten so bad. Those poor kids. It's so hard to watch a grandparent decline like this. You and Marcus are saints for taking such good care of her." And there it was. In one evening, Crystal had convinced my former daughter-in-law, my grandchildren, and most importantly, my son, that Dorothy Harrison was no longer the woman they'd known and loved. I was becoming a cautionary tale, a burden to be managed with loving care and professional help. That night, alone in my room, I wrote the longest journal entry I'd made in years. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment of staged confusion was documented in detail. But more than that, I wrote about the pain of watching my family look at me with pity instead of respect, seeing me as a problem instead of a person. These elderly wisdom stories had taught me that sometimes the cruelest abuse comes wrapped in concern, disguised as love. Crystal was systematically destroying my credibility, my relationships, and my independence, all while convincing everyone, including herself, perhaps, that she was being caring and responsible. But she'd made one crucial mistake during her Thanksgiving performance. In her eagerness to portray me as confused and unreliable, she'd overplayed her hand. The cranberry sauce correction was particularly telling. Any observant person would have noticed that she contradicted something easily verifiable, claiming store-bought food was homemade, while simultaneously suggesting I was the one confused about reality. More importantly, she revealed the timeline of her plan. Those memory care brochures weren't contingency planning. They were active preparation. Crystal was already scheduling tours, checking availability, calculating costs. She wasn't waiting for my condition to deteriorate. She was planning to accelerate the process. As I closed my journal that night, I realized I was running out of time. Crystal's campaign was entering its final phase, and soon the decision about my future would be taken out of my hands entirely. The family forgiveness and healing would have to wait. Right now, I needed to find a way to fight back before it was too late. December brought the first real cold snap Savannah had seen in years, and with it, an unexpected opportunity. Crystal had grown overconfident, believing her campaign was nearly complete. She'd started making plans more openly, discussing next steps with Marcus as if my input was no longer necessary. But she'd forgotten about the deep roots of community connection, the kind that developed over decades of shared experiences. Helen Montgomery proved to be the lifeline I desperately needed. Helen called on a Tuesday morning when Crystal was at her salon appointment, one of the few times I was alone in my own house. Her voice was crisp and concerned when I answered. "Dorothy, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. That woman keeps saying you're not available, but something doesn't feel right. Are you okay?" For the first time in months, I felt like someone was really listening to me, not just listening for signs of decline or confusion. "Helen, I need to see you, but it has to be away from the house. Can you meet me somewhere?" "Of course. How about the coffee shop on Bull Street? I can be there in an hour." I waited until Crystal returned from her appointment, then announced casually that I was walking to the corner market for some fresh bread. It was a routine I'd maintained for years, and even Crystal couldn't object to such a normal activity without seeming overly controlling. Instead, I walked the 6 blocks to meet Helen, my heart pounding with nervous energy I hadn't felt since I was sneaking out to meet Robert when we were teenagers. Helen was waiting in a corner booth, and the moment she saw me, her trained legal eye began assessing. "You look thinner," she said immediately, "and tired. What's really going on?" I told her everything. Every manipulation, every lie, every attempt to isolate me and paint me as incompetent. I talked about the medical appointment where Crystal had answered for me, the financial pressure, the memory care brochures, the systematic destruction of my social connections. Helen listened with the intensity she'd once brought to the bench, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me speak. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Dorothy," she said finally, "in 30 years of family court, I saw this pattern more times than I care to count. This isn't just manipulation. This is elder abuse. Financial exploitation combined with psychological abuse designed to make you doubt your own reality." She pulled out a small notebook and began making notes. "The good news is that you're clearly competent and aware of what's happening. The challenging news is that she's been very systematic about building a case against you. We need to be equally systematic about building one against her. How do we do that?" Helen smiled, the same sharp smile that had intimidated countless attorneys in her courtroom. "We give her enough rope to hang herself. But first, I need to see your documentation." I told her about my journal, The daily entries I've been keeping for 40 years, including the detailed records of Crystal's behavior. Helen's eyes lit up. 40 years of consistent journaling? Dorothy, that's a gold mine. It establishes a pattern of mental acuity and reliable record-keeping that no psychiatrist could dismiss. Can you get me copies? Over the next week, I began a careful campaign of my own. During Crystal salon appointments and errands, I photographed pages of my journal, documenting not just recent events but years of consistent, detailed entries that proved my mental sharpness. I copied financial records that showed careful management of my accounts. I even recorded some of Crystal's more damaging statements when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Helen, meanwhile, was conducting her own investigation. Her contacts in law enforcement and social services provided information about elder abuse patterns, while her legal connections helped her understand the remedies available. Most importantly, she began reaching out to other people Crystal had isolated me from, quietly rebuilding my support network. Your pastor has been concerned about you, Helen reported during our second secret meeting. Mrs. Chun has been watching for you at your mailbox every day. Your hairdresser has been wondering why you stopped coming. Crystal may have cut you off from these people, but she didn't erase their concern for you. But Helen's most valuable contribution was helping me understand Crystal's timeline and strategy. She's moving toward a competency challenge, Helen explained. The memory care research, the medical documentation, the financial concerns. She's building a case to have you declared legally incompetent. Once that happens, Marcus would likely become your guardian. And as his fiancée, she has significant influence over decisions about your care and assets. How long do we have? Not long. These things can move quickly once they're set in motion, especially if there's medical documentation supporting concerns about cognitive decline. We need to act soon. Helen proposed a strategy that would require careful timing and considerable courage. We would let Crystal continue her campaign, but we'd be documenting everything she did. More importantly, we'd create opportunities for her to reveal her true motivations while being recorded. The key is to make her feel so confident that she becomes careless, Helen explained. Right now, she's still being subtle, still maintaining the loving daughter-in-law act. We need her to drop that mask. I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not just hope for survival, but hope for vindication, for the chance to show Marcus in the world who Crystal really was beneath her carefully constructed facade. But I also felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about protecting my house or my money anymore. It was about protecting my son from a woman who saw him as nothing more than a tool for getting what she wanted. The elderly wisdom I'd accumulated over decades told me that sometimes love requires fighting not just for yourself, but for the people you love who can't see the danger they're in. Helen and I shook hands as we prepared to leave the coffee shop that day. Two women in their 70s who had survived husbands' deaths, raised children, managed careers, and navigated decades of life's challenges. We weren't helpless victims. We were strategists preparing for battle. One more thing, Dorothy, Helen said as we gathered our coats. Don't feel guilty about what we're about to do. You're not betraying Marcus by protecting him from someone who's manipulating him. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is expose the truth, even when it's painful. As I walked home that day, I felt my spine straighten and my step quicken. Crystal had underestimated elderly wisdom, mistaking grace for weakness and patience for confusion. She was about to learn that women who had survived decades of life's challenges don't go quietly into anyone's carefully planned future. The emotional growth and healing would come, but first, there would be justice. January arrived with unseasonably warm weather and Crystal's growing impatience. She'd been laying groundwork for months, and I could sense her timeline accelerating. The memory care brochures had multiplied on my kitchen counter, and she'd started mentioning specific facilities by name, as if a decision had already been made. Tranquil Oaks has such a beautiful garden, she'd say while making her morning coffee in my kitchen. The residents seemed so peaceful there. I think you'd really like the art therapy programs, Meemaw. Art therapy programs. She was talking about my future like it was already decided, like I was already gone from my own life. But Helen and I had been preparing our own timeline. She'd helped me install a discreet recording system, Small devices that looked like decorative items but could capture hours of conversation. More importantly, she coached me on how to draw Crystal into revealing her true intentions. The key is to seem vulnerable, Helen had explained. Make her think she's won, that you're ready to go along with her plans. People become careless when they think they've succeeded. The opportunity came on a Tuesday morning when Marcus was at work, and Crystal was feeling particularly confident. She just returned from touring another memory care facility, full of enthusiasm about their specialized programs and caring staff. I decided to test Helen's strategy. "Crystal, honey," I said, settling into my chair with a cup of tea, "I've been thinking about what you and Marcus have been saying about my future. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is time to consider some changes." Her head snapped up from the brochure she'd been organizing, eyes bright with interest. "Really, Meemaw? I'm so glad you're being open to this. It's just because we love you so much." "I know you do," I said, letting my voice sound tired, defeated. "It's just this house is so big, and managing everything has become overwhelming. Maybe it would be better if I were somewhere with more support." Crystal moved closer, like a predator sensing wounded prey. "Oh, Meemaw, that's such a wise perspective. You've carried so much responsibility for so long. You deserve to just relax and let other people take care of things for a change." "What would happen to the house?" I asked, playing into her hands. I'd hate for it to just sit empty. This was the moment I've been waiting for, the question that would reveal Crystal's true plans. She took a deep breath, and I could practically see her calculating how much truth she could reveal. "Well," she said carefully, "Marcus and I have talked about that. We could move in temporarily, just to maintain the property and make sure everything's taken care of. We'd handle all the upkeep, the insurance, the property taxes, all those burdens you've been carrying." "That's very generous of you both," I said, pouring more tea with hands that only trembled slightly. "But what about the expenses? Those care facilities are so costly." Crystal's smile broadened. She thought she was guiding a confused old woman through a logical decision-making process. "Don't you worry about that," she said smoothly. "We've looked into it very carefully. With your savings and the equity in the house, there will be more than enough to cover the best possible care. Marcus could handle all the financial arrangements. You wouldn't have to think about money ever again." There it was. She was planning to liquidate everything. My house, my savings, my investments, to pay for warehousing me in a facility while she and Marcus lived off what remained. But Crystal wasn't finished. Feeling confident now, she began revealing details I hadn't expected. "Actually, I've been in touch with a wonderful financial advisor who specializes in elder care planning," she continued. "He's helped other families in similar situations transition their assets efficiently. There are even some tax advantages to structuring things correctly." My blood ran cold. Crystal hadn't just been planning. She'd been consulting professionals, building a network of accomplices who could help her execute this theft legally. "And Marcus is comfortable with all of this?" I asked, still playing the part of the confused but cooperative elderly woman. "Oh, honey, Marcus just wants what's best for you. He's so grateful that I'm here to handle all these complicated details. Men don't really understand the emotional aspects of elder care. They just want to know that their loved ones are safe and well cared for." The manipulation was breathtaking. She convinced my son that she was being selfless, taking on the burden of my care out of love, when she was actually orchestrating the systematic theft of everything I'd worked for my entire life. But then Crystal made the mistake Helen had predicted she would. In her enthusiasm about the success of her plan, she revealed something that chilled me to the bone. "The beautiful thing is," she said, leaning back in her chair with satisfaction, "once everything is properly arranged, you won't have to worry about any of it. The facility handles medications, meals, activities, everything. And if your condition progresses, well, they're equipped to handle that too. Some residents there don't even receive visitors anymore. Their families find it too upsetting to see them decline." She was planning to disappear me completely, not just take my assets, but erase me from the lives of the people I loved. I excused myself to use the bathroom, my hands shaking now with rage rather than fear. In the hallway, I checked the recording device Helen had hidden in the living room. The red light blinked steadily. Every word had been captured. When I returned, Crystal was on her phone with someone speaking in low tones. I caught fragments of conversation. She's finally accepting reality of the situation. Should be able to move forward within the month. Marcus doesn't need to know all the details right away. She ended the call quickly when she saw me, but the damage was done. Crystal wasn't just manipulating me. She was manipulating Marcus too, managing his emotions and information to keep him compliant with her timeline. That afternoon, I called Helen from the garden, speaking quietly while Crystal was absorbed in her laptop in the house. I got it all, I told her. The financial advisor, the asset liquidation, even her plans to cut me off from family once I'm institutionalized. Perfect, Helen said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Dorothy, what you recorded is evidence of conspiracy to commit elder abuse and financial exploitation. But we need one more thing. We need Marcus to hear her true voice, not just a concerned daughter-in-law actually performs for him. How do we do that? We arrange for him to accidentally overhear a conversation where Crystal thinks you can't understand what she's saying. Can you handle one more performance? I looked back at the house where Crystal was no doubt planning the next phase of my imprisonment, the home where Robert and I had built our life together, where Marcus had grown up, where I'd hoped to spend my remaining years in peace and dignity. Helen, I said, I've been performing strength for months while she tried to convince everyone I was weak. One more performance won't kill me, but it might just save me. These elderly wisdom stories had taught me that sometimes the truth needs help to surface, that justice requires patience and strategy as much as righteousness. Crystal had spent months underestimating the wisdom that comes with age, mistaking my quiet observation for passive acceptance. She was about to learn that women who had survived decades of challenges don't surrender their lives without a fight, and that the most dangerous opponent is one who's been underestimated from the very beginning. The confrontation Helen and I planned required perfect timing and considerable risk. We needed Marcus to hear Crystal's true voice when she thought no one was listening. But setting up that scenario meant I had to pretend to be more confused and helpless than ever before. Helen came to visit on a Wednesday afternoon, when Crystal would be at her standing appointment with the manicurist. I let Marcus know his old friend Judge Montgomery wanted to check on me, and he encouraged a visit. After all, Helen was a respected member of the community, and her concern would only validate the narrative Crystal had been building. When Crystal returned from her appointment, she found Helen and me having tea in the living room. I was playing my part perfectly. Confused about dates, struggling to follow the conversation, asking Helen to repeat herself multiple times. "Oh, how lovely that you're visiting," Crystal said, settling into the chair across from us with the grace of someone claiming territory. Mimo has been having some challenging days lately. I'm sure she's enjoying the company, though she may not remember much of it tomorrow. Helen played her part beautifully, too, looking concerned and slightly uncomfortable with my apparent decline. "I hate to see her struggling like this," she said to Crystal. "You and Marcus are saints for taking on so much responsibility." After Helen left, Crystal was practically glowing with satisfaction. She'd successfully performed her caring daughter-in-law routine for another community member, further cementing the narrative of my decline and her devotion. But what Crystal didn't know was that Helen had left something behind. A small recording device hidden inside the flower arrangement she brought, positioned perfectly to capture conversations in the living room. The trap was set for Thursday evening, when Marcus came for his weekly dinner visit. I'd told him I wasn't feeling up to cooking, so Crystal volunteered to handle everything. She was in the kitchen preparing his favorite meal when he arrived, and I made sure to greet him in the living room where the hidden recorder could capture everything. "Hi, Mom," Marcus said, giving me his usual gentle hug. But I could see the sadness in his eyes, the way he was already treating me like someone who was disappearing. "Marcus, honey," I said, letting my voice sound more fragile than usual. "I've been thinking about what Crystal mentioned, about maybe moving somewhere with more help." His face brightened slightly, not with happiness, but with relief. "Mom, I'm so glad you're considering it. I know it's a big decision, but Crystal has found some really nice places. You'd have people around all the time, activities, medical care right there." I nodded vaguely, as if I was only partially following the conversation. "It's just, I get confused about all the details." Crystal handles so much for me now. From the kitchen came the sounds of dinner preparation and Crystal's voice as she talked on her phone. She thought we couldn't hear her from the living room, but the acoustics of the old house carried sound better than she realized. Should be finalized within 2 weeks, Crystal was saying. The financial advisor says we can have the house appraised and on the market by month's end. No, she's completely agreeable now. I think she finally understands she can't manage on her own anymore. Marcus had been nodding sympathetically at my confused act, but his head turned sharply toward the kitchen. Crystal's voice continued, growing more confident as she thought she had complete privacy. Marcus doesn't need to know all the financial details right away. Men get overwhelmed by these things, and he's already emotional about his mother's condition. Better to just handle everything smoothly and present him with completed arrangements. I watched my son's face change as he heard his fiancée discussing him like he was another problem to be managed, another person whose emotions and input were inconvenient obstacles to her plans. The beautiful thing is, once she's placed in memory care, we won't have to deal with the daily management anymore. These facilities are very good at handling difficult patients, and visiting restrictions mean family members don't have to be exposed to the worst stages of decline. Marcus stood up abruptly, his face pale. Crystal's voice carried on from the kitchen, completely unaware that her private conversation was being overheard. I've already identified a buyer for the antique furniture. The real estate agent thinks we can get $850 for the house, maybe more if we stage it properly. Aftercare facility costs. There should be at least $400,000 left for us to... The plate Marcus had been holding slipped from his hands, shattering on the hardwood floor. The crash echoed through the house, followed by sudden silence from the kitchen. Crystal appeared in the doorway, phone still in her hand, her face cycling through surprise, calculation, and forced concern. Oh my goodness, what happened? Are you okay? But Marcus wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, really seeing me for the first time in months. Mom, he said quietly, how long has this been going on? I dropped the confused act completely, letting him see the sharp intelligence in my eyes that had never actually faded. About 10 months, honey, since right after she moved in. Crystal's carefully constructed world began crumbling in real time. Marcus, sweetie, you're misunderstanding what you heard. I was just discussing contingency plans, making sure we're prepared for any eventuality. But Marcus held up his hand to stop her, his face hardening in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager standing up to bullies. I heard you say she was completely agreeable now. I heard you talking about selling Mom's house and furniture. I heard you say I didn't need to know the financial details. Those were just preliminary conversations, Crystal said, but her voice had lost its sweet coating, becoming sharp and defensive. Someone has to think practically about these things. Your mother needs professional care, and that costs money. My mother, Marcus said, his voice steady but dangerous, is sitting right here, listening to every word you're saying, and she's been listening to everything you've been saying for months. Haven't you, Mom? I nodded, feeling 30 years younger as I watched my son finally see the truth. Every word, honey, every lie, every manipulation, every plan to steal our family's legacy and disappear me into a facility where you'd eventually stop visiting. Crystal's mask finally slipped completely. The concerned daughter-in-law vanished, replaced by someone cold and calculating. You have no idea what you're throwing away, she snapped at Marcus. This house, this lifestyle, I could have given you everything. But you're too weak, just like I always knew you were. And there it was, the truth Crystal had hidden beneath months of performance. Marcus wasn't her beloved fiancé. He was a useful tool for accessing what she really wanted. His feelings, his family relationships, his mother's well-being, all of it was just obstacles to be managed in pursuit of her real goal. Marcus looked at her like he was seeing a stranger. Get out, he said quietly. You don't mean that, Crystal said, attempting to resurrect her manipulative sweetness. You're upset right now. But when you calm down, you'll realize I was only trying to help. Get out, he repeated, louder this time. Get your things and get out of my mother's house. Now! As Crystal stormed upstairs to pack, Marcus came over and sat beside me on the sofa. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have seen what was happening. I took his hand, feeling the calluses from his work, the same hands that used to build me Mother's Day gifts from scraps of wood in our garage. Honey! She was very good at what she did. She made you think you were protecting me when you were actually helping her hurt me. That's not weakness. That's love being manipulated by someone who doesn't understand what real love looks like. The elderly wisdom I gained through decades of marriage and motherhood had taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is protecting the people you care about from those who would exploit their goodness. Marcus had learned a painful lesson about trust and manipulation, but more importantly, he'd learned that his mother's love was strong enough to fight for both of them when he couldn't see the danger clearly. As we listened to Crystal's footsteps overhead, packing up the life she tried to steal from us, I felt something I hadn't experienced in almost a year. Peace. Not just the absence of threat, but the presence of hope. The healing could finally begin, and my family could start rebuilding the trust that had been systematically undermined by someone who saw love as weakness and family as opportunity. The emotional growth would take time, but we had something Crystal never understood. We had each other, and we had the truth. And sometimes, that's enough to overcome even the most carefully planned deception. The weeks following Crystal's departure were like watching our family slowly emerge from a long, dark winter. Marcus moved back into his old room temporarily, not because I needed constant care, but because we both needed time to heal from the trauma of betrayal and rediscover the trust that had been systematically undermined. Helen proved invaluable during this period, helping us understand the legal implications of what Crystal had done and connecting us with authorities who specialized in elder abuse cases. The recordings we'd made, combined with my detailed journal entries and the evidence of Crystal's financial planning, painted a clear picture of conspiracy and attempted exploitation. This isn't just a family matter anymore, Helen explained during one of our many strategy sessions in my living room. Crystal committed serious crimes, elder abuse, attempted financial exploitation, fraud. She needs to face consequences, both to get justice for you and to prevent her from doing this to other families. The investigation revealed that Crystal's manipulation had been even more extensive than we'd realized. She'd been building relationships with financial advisors, real estate agents, and care facility administrators, creating a network of professionals who believed they were helping a concerned family member manage a difficult transition. She'd even obtained preliminary quotes for selling my furniture and art collection. Most chillingly, investigators discovered that this wasn't Crystal's first time targeting an elderly person with assets. They found evidence linking her to 2 previous relationships with older widowers, men who had died under suspicious circumstances after making her a beneficiary in their wills. "You may have saved your own life," the detective assigned to our case told me during one interview. Based on what we've uncovered about her history, we believe Crystal's timeline included more than just institutionalizing you and taking your assets. She has a pattern of relationships that end with the victim's death and significant insurance payouts. The revelation hit Marcus particularly hard. He'd thought he was protecting a troubled but loving woman. Instead, he'd been an unwitting accomplice in what could have been a murder plot. "Mom, how can you ever forgive me?" he asked one evening as we sat in the garden, watching the sunset paint the Spanish moss gold. "I was ready to put you in a facility. I believe her lies about your mental state. I almost helped her steal everything Dad built for us." I reached over and took his hand, feeling the strength in it, the same strength that had helped Robert build this house decades ago. "Honey, forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you receive from people who love you. And I love you too much to let what she did to both of us poison our future." But Marcus needed to do more than accept forgiveness. He needed to understand how the manipulation had worked so he could rebuild his confidence in his own judgment. She was incredibly skilled. I explained. She studied us both, found our vulnerabilities, and exploited them systematically. Your vulnerability was your love for me. She used your concern for my well-being as a weapon against both of us. That's not a character flaw. That's evidence of your good heart being exploited by someone who doesn't understand what love actually means. The healing process wasn't quick or simple. Marcus struggled with guilt and self-doubt, questioning every decision he'd made during Crystal's campaign. I had my own work to do, rebuilding confidence in my judgment and reconnecting with the community connections Crystal had systematically severed. Helen helped coordinate my re-entry into social activities, started with book club and gradually expanding to church functions and community events. The response from friends and neighbors was overwhelmingly supportive. Many had sensed something was wrong, but hadn't known how to help. "We all knew you weren't declining," Mrs. Shin told me over coffee one afternoon. "You were still getting your mail every day at the same time, still maintaining your garden perfectly. But that woman made it so difficult to reach you, and she seemed so concerned and helpful." Dr. Patterson also provided important support, reviewing my case and officially documenting that I showed no signs of cognitive decline or diminished capacity. His records would be crucial if Crystal's lawyers tried to argue that her actions had been motivated by genuine medical concerns. The legal resolution took several months. Crystal was eventually charged with elder abuse, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation, and fraud in connection with the forged documents she prepared. The investigation into her previous relationships resulted in additional charges in 2 other states. Marcus testified about the manipulation he'd experienced, describing how Crystal had gradually convinced him to doubt his own observations about my competence and well-being. His testimony was particularly powerful because it illustrated how skilled manipulators can exploit even strong, intelligent people by targeting their emotions and relationships. "I thought I was being a good son," he told the court. "I thought protecting my mother meant accepting someone else's assessment of her condition, even when that assessment contradicted everything I knew about her character and capabilities. I learned that real protection means trusting your own knowledge of the people you love and being suspicious when someone tries to change that knowledge." But perhaps the most meaningful part of our recovery was the way it strengthened our family bonds. Marcus's children, Sarah and Michael, became regular visitors again, drawn by the restoration of their grandmother's vitality and their father's renewed confidence. "Grandma," Sarah said one Sunday afternoon as we worked together in the garden, "I'm sorry we didn't realize what was happening. We should have known you weren't really getting confused." "Sweetheart," I replied, "Crystal fooled people who had known me for decades. She was a professional at this kind of deception. What matters is that we're together now, and we're smarter about protecting each other." The house itself seemed to come alive again during this period. Rooms that had felt oppressive under Crystal's presence became welcoming again. I resumed my daily routines, reconnected with old friends, and began making plans for the future that centered on family, community, and the simple pleasures of independent living. 6 months after Crystal's arrest, Marcus and I were having Sunday dinner when he brought up a conversation we'd been avoiding. "Mom," he said carefully, "I know you don't want me hovering or treating you like you're fragile, but I wonder if we could talk about the future. Real future planning. Not the kind of manipulation Crystal was doing, but honest conversation about what you want as you get older." It was a fair question, and one that deserved a thoughtful answer. "I want to stay in this house as long as I'm able to maintain it safely," I said. "I want to keep my independence, my social connections, and my ability to make my own decisions. But I also want to know that if something does happen to me, real illness, real decline, the people making decisions will be people who love me for who I am, not what I have." We worked together over several weeks to create genuine estate planning documents, with Marcus as my designated agent for financial and medical decisions, but only in the event of actual incapacity verified by multiple independent medical opinions. We also established regular check-ins with Helen and other community members, creating accountability systems that would make it difficult for anyone to isolate me again. Most importantly, we talked honestly about money, assets, and inheritance, topics that had been weaponized by Crystal, but needed to be discussed openly between people who trusted each other. "I want you and the grandchildren to inherit this house and everything in it," I told Marcus. "But I want that inheritance to come from love and natural succession, not from someone convincing you I'm incapable of managing my own life." A year after Crystal's departure, we received word that she had been sentenced to 5 years in prison, with requirements to pay restitution to all her victims. The sentence felt like closure, but more importantly, it felt like validation that what had happened to us was real, serious, and worthy of legal consequences. These elderly wisdom stories taught me that recovery from manipulation and abuse isn't just about individual healing. It's about rebuilding trust in relationships and systems, reconnecting with community, and using your experience to help others recognize similar dangers. I began speaking at senior centers and community groups about elder abuse recognition and prevention. Marcus joined me at many of these events, sharing his perspective on how family members can be manipulated into becoming accomplices to abuse. The most important thing, I would tell these audiences, is to remember that aging doesn't automatically equal vulnerability, and love doesn't require giving up your judgment. Real family support helps people maintain their independence and dignity. It doesn't systematically undermine them. As I sit here now, 2 years later, in my kitchen with the Spanish moss still swaying outside my window, I'm struck by how much has changed and how much has remained the same. The house still echoes with memories, but they're joyful ones again. Marcus still calls every day, but it's to share news and ask advice, not to monitor my condition. My social calendar is full again. My financial affairs are in perfect order, and my future is mine to determine. The emotional growth that came from surviving Crystal's manipulation made all of us stronger and wiser. Marcus learned to trust his instincts about people and to question anyone who tries to change his perception of those he loves. I learned that fighting back against abuse isn't about anger or revenge. It's about protecting the values and relationships that make life meaningful. Family forgiveness, I discovered, isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it wasn't serious. It's about choosing to let love be stronger than hurt and choosing to build a future together based on truth rather than the lies someone else tried to make us believe. And healing? Healing is what happens when you refuse to let someone else's manipulation define your story. When you insist on writing your own ending based on dignity, love, and the elderly wisdom that comes from surviving life's challenges with your integrity intact. The Spanish moss sways and Savannah breeze outside my kitchen window, and I'm still here, still sharp, still independent, still surrounded by the people and things I love. Crystal tried to steal my future, but she failed to understand the most important truth about women like me. We don't just survive, we prevail. And that, my dear friends, is a story worth telling.